All right, we're going to take a look at the roles of the President of the United States, what the President does, the duties the President serves, and kind of what this means for our country. Okay, so the qualifications to be a President, and this is all written in the Constitution. In Article 2 of the Constitution, you have to be a natural-born citizen. Now, what this means, again, you have to be a citizen at the time of your birth. For example, John McCain was running for president. He was actually born in the Panama Canal Zone. His parents were both citizens. He was a natural-born citizen. Okay. You must be 35 years old. So again, adding a little bit more prestige than what we saw with Congress. So you had the House of Representatives. You had to be 25 years old and lived in the United States for 7 years. The Senate was 30 years, and you had to live here for 9 years. The President takes it up a notch, 35 years old, and must live in the United States for 14 years. Okay. Now again, all of these things that have been put into place, these are in the original Constitution, 1787, 1788, and really the founders and the architects of the Constitution were afraid of foreign influences coming in and taking over our country. So again, a lot of people have questioned this, whether this is necessary now. We live in such a pluralistic society, so much ethnic diversity. But either way, to get rid of it, you'd have to amend the Constitution. Okay. Now, traditionally, ever since George Washington, we've had 2 terms being the precedent that was set from George Washington. The only president to serve more than 2 terms was Franklin Roosevelt. Now, if you remember back to U.S. history, this time period is probably some of the most tumultuous time period in our existence, along with the Civil War and the early years with George Washington. FDR was elected 4 times, 1932, 36, 40, and 44. That is also during the Great Depression, our worst economic downturn, and World War II. So the country didn't want to transition during, again, arguably 2 of the largest crises our country has ever faced. George Washington set this precedent after he was unanimously elected by the Electoral College twice, and then stepped aside on his own terms after his second term. After FDR was out of office, the 22nd Amendment passed that you can only be elected president twice and only serve for 10 years total. So there's some kind of weird scenarios where if the vice president becomes president during the first term, 10 years, 2 terms, 22nd Amendment. Okay. So, benefits of the presidency, obviously you get a nice house. The salary right now is $400,000. You have a personal expense account of $50,000, travel expense account, entertainment account. There's the bowling alley and the basketball court at the White House. Retirement, again, you serve for 4 years, you get $207,000 per year as a retirement benefit. Air Force One, which is pretty sweet air transportation. Camp David, which is the president's official vacation home in Maryland. Camp David. Medical care, Secret Service protection for life. And again, with all this comes some pretty remarkable responsibility. Okay. So this I can tell is messed up on your end. Okay. If the president dies, they have this line of succession that's set up. Vice president would automatically become president, and then this line goes all the way down through Speaker of the House, President pro tempore of the Senate, Secretary of State. You can see all the way down, Homeland Security. Okay, so we have this succession lined up that in the case of an emergency or an attack, that we have this set up. And I show this in class, and this is a great show. If you have Netflix, check this out, Designated Survivor. The premise is that it's the State of the Union, and everyone that's in the cabinet is at the Capitol, and it gets bombed by an attack. I won't tell you who. You got to watch it. And anytime everyone is all in the same place, there's one person in this line of succession that is at an undisclosed location in case an attack happens. In this case, in the show, it's the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and he becomes president because everyone dies. So we have thought about this and do have a plan if that ever happens. Probably will not happen. Let's pray on that. Okay. So continuing on with what the president, the vice president, okay, is mainly an insignificant office. Right now it's Mike Pence. They preside over the Senate if there's a tie. If the president has some sort of mental disability, incapable of completing his duties, usually when they're under surgery, under anesthesia. This happened most recently with George H.W. Bush. It also happened to Ronald Reagan. There was an assassination attempt. The 25th Amendment sets in place something that's called the acting president. In that case, the vice president will move into the role of president for that time being. But other than that, the vice president is usually a figurehead, more ceremonial. They don't have any voting power, except if there's a tie in the Senate. That doesn't happen rarely ever. Okay. So roles of the president. Okay. And there's 7 roles, and we'll talk about these. Okay. Chief of State. So this is the president acting as the symbol of the United States. So anytime you see the president, greeting a king and queen, President Trump just went to the UK and met with the Queen. He is the symbol of the nation. If they're giving out awards, or they're giving out, hosting the Easter egg hunt, or bringing in the championship team to the White House, this is all the role of Chief of State. They are the symbol of the United States. Okay. The next role, the Chief Executive. So the executive branch is 15 different departments. Okay. So the president is the head of the executive branch. So these branches, Secretary or Department of Education, Department of Defense, Department of Justice, Housing and Urban Development, Health and Human Services. The president is in charge of all of those federal branches. Okay, so the president, again, their role is to carry out those laws. So if Congress passes the laws, the executive branch is the one that carries those out. Okay, so President Obama and President Bush and Trump, they all get to pick their cabinet members. Who are their advisors? These are the people that lead their departments. So anytime you hear someone that's secretary of, that's in the executive branch. That's one of the executive departments that the president is at the top of all of them. Okay. Again, usually meeting in the White House, other federal buildings around Washington, D.C. Okay. Chief diplomat. So anytime there's trade agreements, foreign ambassadors, policies, treaties, dealing with official U.S. business with other countries. So Chief of State is more ceremonial. Chief diplomat, more official with treaties, ambassadors. There's been trade deals, the stuff with the tariffs that's going on with Mexico and China. That's all part of the chief diplomat role. Probably the biggest one that's remembered or known is the commander-in-chief. So the president is the head of all 5 branches of the military. Okay, so we have the Joint Chiefs of Staff who are in charge of, again, military advisors, and you have the Department of Defense and the Secretary of Defense, but the President is in charge of the armed forces, so the Coast Guard, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and the Army. The President decides a lot of military decisions as the Commander-in-Chief. Okay. Now, a couple more. He is the Chief Legislator, she. Okay. So again, Congress has the power to make laws, but the President can propose laws. So you think about Obamacare. President Obama didn't make that law. He didn't, pass that law through Congress, but he's really lobbying Congress, getting Congress to pass their agenda. Trump, they talk about the Trump tax cuts. Those were, negotiated and put forth and kind of pushed through Congress with President Trump. So a lot of times they lay out their legislative agenda at the State of the Union address. So anything dealing with laws is legislation. Okay. You have the head of the political parties. Okay, so again, we have kind of a two-party system. Okay, the president is the face of that political party, whether it's the Democrats or Republicans. Okay, giving speeches, fundraising, supporting candidates. Okay, so whether it's Trump in the Republican Party, Obama representing the Democratic Party, they are the face of their party. And the last one, I know it's kind of blurred out, economic planner. Okay, so monitoring unemployment, inflation, taxation, businesses. Again, they don't necessarily, obviously no one person controls the economy, but the president really gets a lot of credit or grief, depending on how the economy goes. They make some very special appointments to the Treasury Department, to the Federal Reserve that controls inflation. So a lot of stuff with GDP, gross domestic product. The president is really kind of overseeing all of that. So those are the 7 roles. We'll look at them more in depth in class. So yeah, there you go. Have a great day.